What's your poison?
So let's talk a little bit about the Scotch, and then we can discuss what exactly the difference is between these three things. So the Scotch I'm drinking tonight is called Sir Edward's Finest Blended Scotch Whiskey. It is, like I said, a blend. If you've had Dewar's or another, common blend like that, it's similar. It's a little more smoky, but it's nothing to write home about. It's all right. It's not as sweet or smooth as Dewar's, but it'll do. It's not a bougie single malt. And, fetishes aren't generally considered classy, so I think it's a decent pick for our first episode here. I got it from Total Wine. It's got 4 stars on their website. It is a Spirits Direct product, which most of what I will be drinking is. They're usually from smaller distilleries. And they're not, your name brand alcohols. And it runs for $12.99 for a $7.50. So it's pretty cheap, but it gets the job done. All right, so let's dive in. So fetish and kink are often used interchangeably, but although they can and do overlap, there are major differences. So most people won't come across any problems using them as synonyms. Semantics don't generally matter to people who aren't actively in the lifestyle, but for someone like me who's been in and out of the kink lifestyle, but a member of the family since I was 15, it matters. I'm also a total stickler for grammar, so that could be why I care too. Paraphilia is a synonym for fetish, but it's not the same as a paraphilic disorder. So here we go. We're going to start at the least, I guess you can call it intense thing first, a kink. So a kink is just something outside of the societally accepted quote-unquote vanilla sex acts. Think missionary, the sex you'd imagine your parents having if you had to imagine your parents having sex. So the key points of a kink are that they add to the sexual pleasure, but they aren't necessary to achieve sexual pleasure. Like slapping, spanking, choking, restraint, blindfolds, toys such as vibrators, cock rings, etc. They're all going to intensify and vary your experiences, but you'd be able to become sexually aroused and achieve orgasm without them. A fetish or paraphilia is different. A true fetish will most likely need to be present for the party in question to get horny. Sex acts without the fetish involved won't be nearly as pleasurable and may not even result in an orgasm. So these tend to be discovered by accident. There's one thing called sounding that a lot of people might not be familiar with, and it's a little cringy if you're not familiar with it, but it involves placing a rod, usually with a little bulb at the end, inside the urethra. Mostly practiced by men, but some women do practice it. And you might be thinking, how in the hell does anyone decide that they like that? A lot of times it happens when they're in the hospital and they have to get catheterized. So the catheter is placed in the urethra and it stimulates those nerves. They get aroused, and that's the end of that. That's what they need from that point on. So other paraphilias like cross-dressing can happen from childhood, like becoming accidentally aroused while watching your mother undress or get ready for a party. You might accidentally start associating women's clothing with the feeling of being aroused. So you may start stealing her underwear, or when you're old enough, you might buy a pair for yourself and keep it secret, or if you have a sister, you might steal something from her. And it'll likely just intensify from there. So, a paraphilic disorder is a whole different animal. Speaking of animals, bestiality counts as a paraphilic disorder. The actual definition of a paraphilic disorder, and this came from mercmanuals.com, says, quote unquote, paraphilic disorders are recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasies, urges, or behaviors that are distressing or disabling and involve inanimate objects, children or non-consenting adults, or suffering or humiliation of oneself or the partner with the potential to cause harm. So these can also happen from childhood, but it's more like becoming aroused when seeing something violent happen, or maybe your mother was abused, and while watching her be abused, you became aroused. Or while watching a violent movie, the gory scenes would get you aroused. Or maybe you were beaten as a child. That can also, in conjunction with a few other things, like genetic predisposition, etc., can lead you to become aroused and even, achieve orgasm based on things that are wildly unhealthy. Think of some infamous criminals like Ted Bundy. He was a rapist and a necrophiliac. Jeffrey Dahmer tortured his victims, attempting to make a sex zombie by drilling holes in their heads and pouring acid into those holes. And then once that obviously killed his subject, he would then have sex with the body. So they're obviously the least healthy of all of them. The fetishes and kinks, you're probably going to find somebody, and you'll be able to have a fulfilling sex life with most people, if you're kinky. Fetishes, that's going to take some getting used to, and you'll probably have to actually work and go on a site like FetLife or kink.com to find a like-minded partner that can and would probably be delighted to fulfill your deepest desires. If you think you have a paraphilic disorder, though, don't worry about finding a partner that shares that. Just seek professional help before we're all hearing about you on a true crime podcast. Now, here's the fun part. I made up a little drinking game. I found a study that discussed how common some of these kinks, fetishes, and paraphilic disorders are among the general population. So, vanilla is getting harder to define, and kinky sex is becoming the norm. So a lot of you will probably recognize yourself in these. These I'm about to list are the typical kinks or fetishes. So over half of those surveyed have admitted to fantasizing or practicing these. So if any of these describe you, go ahead and take a sip of whatever you're drinking. I hope you're drinking. You should be drinking. I am. All right, so sex in an unusual place. Unusual being anything other than the bedroom or, let's say, a couch in this instance. Anywhere it would be deemed, quote-unquote, inappropriate, like a public place. Sex with two women. Surprise, surprise, mostly men have this one. Sex with a stranger. Being dominated sexually. Dominating someone sexually. This one I liked because the percentages were actually pretty equal between men and women. At least for me, I've always been more submissive, which surprises people because I'm obnoxious and pretty dominant in my everyday life. I'm kind of bossy and loud and really need to get my way. So for me, it's nice to be able to let some of that go and just worry about pleasing my partner. So I've kind of always been that way. And in my experience, it's been that people like the opposite of their daily life. So if you're really meek and shy in your daily life, you might enjoy taking charge in the bedroom. It's a way for you to let out that side of your personality that maybe you don't get to around your family or in the workplace. So I liked that it was somewhat equal, because I would have assumed that women mostly fantasize about dominating someone. All right, being tied up. This one was pretty equal again. I like that. I like that there were a lot of men admitting to wanting to be tied up. That's the problem with some of these surveys. They are reliant on people being honest about what they want and being willing to admit some less than flattering things about themselves, or things that they wouldn't want to admit in normal conversation. So it may be skewed, so take it with a grain of salt, but I'm sure we can agree that these are the more common things that you hear about. They're the things on the front page of, Pornhub. Anal sex. Not going to surprise you. That's mostly men. Yeah, there are women that enjoy it. I am not one. Let me rephrase. I might be one. I don't know. It has not been physically possible for me to participate in anal sex. So take from that what you will. I've tried. Sex with more than 3 women. To me, that just seems chatty. That sounds terrible to me, but I'm not alone, because only 25% of women think that would be fun. 75% of men think that would be fun. Remember, take a sip anytime you hear yourself in one of these. Watching someone undress without them knowing. Sex with more than 3 people, including men and women. This one I liked. Over half of women, over 50% of women would want to do that. And I totally get that. A threesome with 2 men is so taboo, and which is funny because the flip side with 2 women is pretty expected at this point. That's almost vanilla in this day and age. But with 2 men, it's called the devil's threesome, for God's sakes. It's just not talked about, and that is on my bucket list. May not ever achieve it, but a girl can dream. Only 16% of men, no surprise there, would admit to fantasizing about that. Being photographed or filmed during sex. Being ejaculated on. If I'm not saying the percentages between men and women after these stats, it's only because they were probably exactly what you think. They're just not shocking, or they were, perfectly equal. Either way, it's just not even worth going into. I will post the link to the survey, though. All right, this one was probably the most surprising to me, and even I brought it up to my coworker, and he was not surprised at all by this. Shout out to Eric. Having sex with a much younger partner. Only 18% of women versus 57% of men. That shocked me. You hear about cougars all the time, but the guy I'm dating actually put it in a good perspective. I think the age range for men wanting a younger woman is much wider. It starts at a younger age for men. So the guy I'm dating is 33, and he was saying how a guy his age could totally fantasize about a 20-year-old, which makes perfect sense. But a woman my age, I'm 30, not generally going to fantasize about a 20-year-old. Young men are irritating. I have a little bit of a different perspective because I do like men and women and everything in between. I think they're all irritating at that age. And most people irritate me at this age, so I don't know how I ever get laid, honestly. Can't stand most people. That's fine. Spanking or whipping someone. Being spanked or whipped. And finally, being forced to have sex. This may surprise you, but it was pretty equal. Both men and women want to be forced to have sex, which I understand the rape fantasy. I do. It may not be the most kosher thing, but that's what we're here for, to be made uncomfortable, so here we go. Rape fantasies are all about giving up control in a safe way. So feeling like you could be hurt, but knowing in the back of your mind that you trust the person you're with and you're not actually going to be hurt. It's a way to kind of indulge in that. And it's a lot like a horror movie or a roller coaster. You're scaring yourself for fun, knowing that you're probably inherently safe. There is a little bit of a risk with a roller coaster and a little bit of a risk with the rape fantasy, but generally speaking, you're going to be fine. And that's why you really shouldn't. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but it's probably safer to wait until you do trust the person